Welcome to the webinar here today. If you do have questions, feel free to throw them in the Q&A or in the chat, rather, and we'll go ahead and pick up some of those at the end. We do have a lot of questions that were sent before the webinar started during registration, so we'll start with those and see how much time we have to get through other questions as well. And yeah, with that, I think we'll go ahead and get started here. So again, once again, I'm really happy to be joined by Gina Yi, who's the Senior Business Development Manager at Rakuten. And I'll give her kind of more time to present about herself when we get close to her part. And then I'm Nate Shurilla, and you might be like, wow, Nate, that's a great picture. I have an excuse. I just got a new headshot last week. It's not quite ready. But as you can tell, I've got really long samurai kind of hair right now. And so I kind of pushed the beard in and it just came out the top of my head, and that's what happened. So that's why it's different. But I'm the head of APAC here at Pacvue and the broader assembly group, which includes brands like Helium 10 and Pipe Candy as well. And we're really happy to be here to share about Japan and how your business can thrive here through Rakuten. So we will be recording this webinar as well and sharing it with all the registrants. So don't worry if you have to like jump off in the middle and miss something. We will make sure that you get everything afterwards. So a little bit about today's presentation. We're going to start with what I just did, the introduction, and then now I'm going to share a bit of background about the Japanese market. I have been living here for over a decade. I've worked in very large companies here. The last company I was in, a 150-year-old company called Shiseido. I was their global head of e-commerce for the Shiseido group. And before that, I was in a 120-year-old company called Dentsu, and I was their global director of commerce there. So lots of experience in the market, speak, read, write Japanese, all that local kind of fun stuff. And after I talk a little bit about kind of the background and how the Japanese market differs a bit from maybe Western markets, or especially the US in general, I'll hand it over to Gina to talk about Rakuten, the leading marketplace here in Japan. Then we'll get into kind of cross-border e-commerce, how you can sell into Japan through Rakuten, which I think is what everyone's really interested in here today. And we'll finish it off with a Q&A at the end. So diving right into it, just real quick, what's Pacvue? Nate, you're Pacvue. What's Pacvue? I haven't heard of Pacvue. We're a commerce acceleration platform. So we do a lot of things like retail media. We also integrate paid media data with sales data so that you can make sure your advertising is being incremental, and we make sure that you can kind of manage all of your e-commerce in one place. So we tie together a lot of these different platforms, again, so you can run everything in one place, get all that reporting, all that fun stuff. But that's not why you're here today. Well, it might be, in which case, thank you. But let's get into the Japanese market and talk a little bit about what it's like here. So when you look at the numbers, Japan's a pretty large country, especially for its size, with over 126 million people, and it's very centralized here in Tokyo, as well as other major kind of metropolitan areas like Osaka and Fukuoka, etc. GDP, is the third largest economy in the world. Internet usage, everyone uses the internet for, for pretty much. And then everyone's very active on social media. And we'll talk just a little bit about which social media platforms are important here in Japan as well. But as you can see, a very high penetration rate there. And retail sales, so just overall sales, is similar to its GDP at number 3. When it comes to e-commerce, though, it's a little bit of a different story. And so lots of people, they do search online when they're making the purchase. They visit a lot of the offline stores. So one of the big things is, like, in Japan, there's what are called konbini, or convenience stores, like a 7-Eleven. And these are like on every street corner. So when you think of e-commerce, you think of the kind of convenience that it unlocks for people. There's already a lot of that convenience when you have such a dense country like Japan. So things like FMCG, there's other platforms that you'll want to look into and kind of understand for the market here. Also, shopping app on mobile phone or tablet, very high penetration rate there. I always use the Rakuten app. I get my Rakuten points. It's very seamless. And many people here in Japan use the app as opposed to the online site. And then, just purchased, online purchasers in general, 73%. purchased in the last month, 32%. And so you can see there's a bit of a gap there. It's not always as frequent, again, because Japan's a very convenient market. When it comes to e-commerce size, here we've got, China's obviously the biggest, everyone knows that. US is number 2 and UK is number 3 with Japan at number 4. If we look and fast forward to 2023, the UK is at about 196 billion now and Japan's at 191 billion. If you look at the growth rates, which I think I have on the next slide, spoiler alert, Japan's set to overtake the UK this year if things continue as they have. Last year, the UK market actually contracted a little bit. And so which categories are the biggest here in Japan? You can see travel, mobility, accommodation. Japanese people love to travel. Fashion and beauty. Food and personal care are the next 2 biggest, very comparable, which was great when I was in Shiseido. Toys, DIY hobbies, electronics, furniture and appliance. These are kind of like the top categories here, but if your category isn't here, it doesn't mean you can't succeed in Japan. It just means you might want to take a little bit longer to kind of plan out your strategy. So again, as I was saying, where is Japan going? One of the interesting things about Japan is that during the pandemic, like the rest of the world, Japan's e-commerce rate did grow very quickly. And you can see that jumping up here in the slides around the year 2020. What was different in Japan is that there weren't any hardcore lockdowns where like you couldn't go outside, you couldn't go shopping. You could still generally do business as usual. It was just like at nighttime, there were certain restrictions. And so because of that, while it jumped up, it didn't jump up quite as drastically as maybe markets like UK and US. But what we do see is that the growth has been consistent. So it jumped up and it continues to grow from that higher position. Whereas, as I mentioned earlier, like the UK market contracted a bit, the US as well, it kind of went up and then we saw a bit of a dip before it returned to growth in e-commerce. So Japan is a very stable and reliable market, I think is one of the things that you can take from that. The other thing is when you look at the share of e-commerce in Japan, what I have here highlighted in orange, these are kind of like the major platforms. So like Rakuten is going to be one of these EC malls. Then you'll have things like online retail, which is, it has both an online and an offline presence and multiple brands. Outside of that, there are brand sites, there are, C2C things as well, but they're nowhere near as massive as kind of the big players. So the top dogs in Japan run about 80% of all of the e-commerce here. So it's a great place to start and it's a great place to continue when you're growing your business here in Japan. Now, talking about these major platforms, looking at just e-commerce specifically, you can see Rakuten, when it comes to sales, is leading the market here in Japan. Next up, you do have Amazon, which is quite large here in Japan, as well as, in places like the US. And then there's quite a steep drop-off when it comes to third place, which is Yahoo Shopping. From there, you've got things like auction sites, you've got C2C, consumer to consumer, you've got fashion with Zozo and all of these other things. And you also have Rakuten, it has a C2C site as well. And so, again, there's that steep drop off. And as I was mentioning, it's 80% kind of focused, again, in these top platforms. What's interesting then is when you look at social, it's very different from other markets. So the top one is Line, which is actually a messaging service. And so there are social things within there. There's also some selling. It's mainly like gifting, like yesterday was Valentine's Day. And so it was like, hey, send, a gift to your Valentine. And so there's lots of gifts that you can send, but most people don't use it to buy for themselves currently. So it's kind of social, it's kind of not. It's more like messaging. It's trending towards a super app, but it's not, like a WeChat or anything like that. Then you've got YouTube, which is YouTube, there's nothing surprising there. And then Twitter is actually of like the pure kind of social media platforms, the largest here in Japan. And so within that, people are quite active on Twitter. Next would be Instagram for more visual type things. So things like fashion, things like beauty, it's very important to kind of be on Instagram. And then Facebook after that. So Facebook is actually very much geared towards business professionals in Japan. Facebook didn't choose that. That's just kind of how it ended up. So if you go to like a conference or if you meet some business professionals, they might ask you for your Facebook as opposed to, like your LinkedIn as you'd expect in other markets. So that's just another nuance. And then TikTok has been rising very, very quickly. I'm sure it's actually well above this now. This was actually late last year, but it continues to grow very quickly. And again, this is what you'd expect. You know, people's in their 10s and 20s have been using TikTok quite a bit. But the reason I wanted to talk a little bit about social, besides giving background in the market, is that many people use Line as a CRM system. So after they make a purchase on Rakuten or wherever, they will send them a link or like a QR code and say, hey, join us, follow us online so we can, you know, keep in contact, send you promotions and other things. So they'll use that Line as kind of their hub for all of their kind of loyalty programs and other things. And then they'll link that to like Rakuten. And so they'll send links and say, hey, you know, here's a sale that's going on. Here's where you can get extra points or whatever. So that's why I wanted to make sure that this was kind of tied together. Moving on, I want to kind of zoom out a little bit and talk about the larger APAC and Asia experience in general. So when you think of APAC, most people start and they think of Tmall in China and JD in China. And so China's China. We're going to let China be China today. We're not going to dive too deep. But the other thing that people think of when they hear Asia is Shopee and Lazada. And if you hear India, you think of like Flipkart as well. So these, you know, honeycombs here are actually to scale of how big the platforms are. And what's interesting is when you look at like Lazada and you look at Shopee, these are spread out across multiple markets, and they're kind of newer platforms for it. So everything's changing all the time and it gets pretty complicated. I know this, I was selling on them quite a bit within Shiseido, but Rakuten's really nice because it's all centralized in one market. This is all in Japan. So it's a very, very large, even on the Asia scale and global scale. And a great place, again, to kind of establish yourself. And really, once you get that going, you'll see very strong returns. One of the reasons that Rakuten's been able to grow so much, and I call this their superpower sometimes, is their super points. So within Rakuten, every time you make a purchase, you get points back. And they do things like they'll have super point days or Rakuten super sales where you can get like 16 times points in a certain category on a certain product. And, you know, it becomes very much like a game. And as you know, Japan's a very big country when it comes to gaming, things like Nintendo, Sony, etc. And so the consumers as well, they love to gamify this. I've got a friend who's like, I think they've got like $10,000 of Rakuten points right now. I was like, holy crap, like how did you get so many? And they're like, I only shop at Rakuten because I want to keep getting these points. And so why do they want to keep getting these points? They're extremely useful. You can use them, of course, on Rakuten, but it's an ecosystem here in Japan. And so these point systems, you can go ahead and you can get your Rakuten points, and then you can go to Big Camera, which is like an electronics store offline, and make a purchase there. You can take your Rakuten points and go to McDonald's and buy a cheeseburger. So it's very much like digital cash in a lot of ways within this ecosystem. So you can see they got 700,000 offline partners. And again, like people are just like, I need my Rakuten points. So I'm only going to buy at Rakuten. And so, yeah, it's got, you know, the biggest share in the market. And as we'll see here on the next slide, this is kind of how these ecosystems work. So again, Rakuten's the biggest, and this is all Japanese for all of you Japanese connoisseurs over here. But what this is saying is that Rakuten Point has 68 to 70% of the total population of Japan. So as we mentioned, Japan, 126 million people, very high penetration rate for Rakuten points. The next highest is around 50%. And oftentimes people will be using both as well. But you can see Rakuten points, they dominate the market. And the reason I have kind of this ecosystem up here is because I wanted you to notice another thing, is that you don't see Amazon on here at all. So I mentioned that Amazon is in the market. They're, you know, the number 2, and they're very large here in the market, but they don't have a point system. They don't have that kind of local nuance or local understanding of the market. They've recently done some like point things, but again, it's just isolated within Amazon. So you can't, again, go to Mr. Donut and buy a donut with your Rakuten points with if you've had like Amazon ones. So again, this is another thing that just shows how Rakuten is very ingrained within the Japanese society. And it's, you know, it shows that you're putting forth that local foot to make sure that you are, again, adapting to the market and listening to kind of the needs and the cultural nuances. From here then, we're going to talk about Rakuten as, again, the leading marketplace in Japan. where it's going, how you can utilize it to enter Japan. And so for this section, I'm going to stop sharing here and switch over so that Gina can go ahead and present. So over to you, Gina. Oh, Gina, I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Can you see the slide?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay.
And hear it. You're good to go.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Nate. That was a really good insight. Hi, everyone. I am Gina Yi. I am the Senior Business Development Manager of Rakuten Global Sales Strategy Team. And so I am leading a merchant acquisition team based in both Tokyo and San Francisco Bay Area to onboard US and EU merchants and to sell on Rakuten Japan. And a little bit more background about me. I joined Rakuten in 2019 and out of my love for Japanese culture and arts. And yeah, it's been over 3 years. And I would say it's a really great journey for me to be able to see a lot of companies trying to understand the really unique markets and really large market as well. And also see some business that really takes off and in the Japanese market and the leverage on the large economy. And so I'm really happy to be here to share more about who is Rakuten and what we do to help overseas sellers to grow international sales into this really large economy. Yeah, so without further ado, let me get to Rakuten first. And so Rakuten is the leading marketplace in Japan. And our company was founded in 1997 and went public in 2000. And so we are the largest e-commerce company in Japan and also the third largest in the world. And so as you can see in this table that we started our globalization strategy in 2010. And over the years, we have currently have our business and services operating in over 30 regions and countries and with 28,000 employees and global wise. And so it's a really big company, and that was, a really huge growth opportunity for overseas companies and to leverage on. And so communications, membership, and data are the 3 pillars of our global ecosystem. It's really amazing to see how Rakuten, just seamlessly link our services and through the memberships. We started from e-commerce, and then we expanded to over 70 services, including Rakuten Bank, which is the largest credit card company in Japan, mobile services, and we are the 4th mobile carrier in Japan, and travel, digital content, entertainment, and even life and leisure, and ads and media. So this entire ecosystem really allows us to grow our business and into exponentially. So in 2022, we have achieved a global GTV of $244 billion, and our global membership reached 1.6 billion. And we were able to issue super points that reached to $4.5 billion, which is an amazing number. And so it also allows us to, leverage our group resource to grow international brand awareness. As you can see here, that we have over 80% brand awareness in countries and regions like Taiwan, France, and Spain. And in the US, with Rakuten Rewards become the largest affiliate marketing network, and our sponsorship into Golden State Warrior team and our ads placement in Super Bowl, we were able to achieve a brand awareness close to 70%. And so a little bit more highlights, very fresh data from our IR reports released 2 days ago. And so our Japan domestic e-commerce sales has achieved a 12.3 YOY growth, and that's about $41 billion and 5.6 trillion Japanese yen. And our consolidated revenue grew by 40.6%, and it's about $30.7 billion. Rakuten card holders grew by 11.9%, and that's about 29 million credit card holders. And what I want to emphasize here is the Rakuten Card and global GTV grew by an amazing 25%, and that's about $131 billion US. And so this is a really huge ecosystem and with large scale but right now we have several hundreds of overseas sellers, and we are waiting for more sellers to join us and to play in this ecosystem and achieve more international sales success. And so furthermore, so Rakuten Groups, we have basically we're way ahead of our competition in terms of the consolidated revenue scale. And you can see here, we're way ahead of our competition of Z Holding, which is a parent company of Yahoo Japan. And also our direct competition in fashion vertical, Mercari, and also ZOZOTOWN. And well, even as the major marketplace in Japan, we have been dominating the marketplace for many years. And Rakuten has actually never stopped and accelerated our growth. And you can see from this table that, well, it's actually ever since the pandemic in 2022, our sales has grown much faster than before. And before 2022, it took us 3 to 4 years on average to reach the next 1 trillion Japanese yen. But from 2022, it takes about less than a year for us to grow another additional 1 trillion Japanese yen. And so 2022, we have achieved 5.6 trillion, which is about $41 billion US. And our goal is to reach 10 trillion Japanese yen. And that's going to be about $72 billion US. And in terms of the traffic, we also have achieved a very impressive growth in 2022. Last year, our monthly active users grew by 11.2%, and that's about 39 million, monthly active users. And that lead us to as the 7th largest website in Japan and the 2nd largest e-commerce website. And so we launched Rakuten Fashion as an independent marketplace in 2020 with a really unique and distinguished, very minimalistic and fashion-forward UI and UX to cater to the demand and needs of fashion brands, especially the luxury fashion brands. And so that launch really took off. And so after 2 years, last year, we achieved a really high 10% YOY growth, and our GMV surpassed 1 trillion Japanese yen, which is 2.5 times more than our direct competition, ZOZOTOWN. And that's another very popular fashion marketplace in Japan. And as Nate mentioned, Rakuten's Super Points is very popular in Japan. It's the largest points program. And last year, our success went even further. And we are also ranked as the #1 in terms of customer satisfaction. And we issued about 620 billion Japanese yen value of Rakuten Super Points. And over the years, we have accumulated a total of 3.3 trillion Japanese yen Rakuten points. So it's a really large ecosystem that creates huge sales potential for not only the Japanese sellers, but also overseas sellers. And how do we actually help overseas sellers to tap into Rakuten's ecosystem? Here, I'd like to share more details about Rakuten's cross-border business. So Rakuten's cross-border e-commerce program is built upon personal input. And traditionally, it's really hard for overseas companies to enter the Japanese market because it usually requires the overseas company to find a local distributor, which is very time-consuming and costly, or the founder or CEO of the overseas company needs to be either Japanese citizen or a permanent resident. Both present really high entry barrier for overseas companies to consider entering Japanese market. But with cross-border e-commerce program is a game changer. And basically, Rakuten's program allows overseas company in qualified countries to open a shop on Rakuten with their local entity and also receive payout in their local currency. And you don't need to hire a team in Japan to run your store. And you can definitely leverage your existing e-commerce operation team with a little bit of Japanese operation capacity. And so in order to grow your sales on Rakuten. And it's duty-free for most of the categories when the order is under 16,666 Japanese yen. That's about $125 US. And for the Japanese consumers, they don't need to pay the sales tax when the sellers are overseas companies. And so the entire scheme is quite intuitive. And so basically, if you're a qualified entity, you can just apply through my team. And once you pass Rakuten's, merchants application screening, you can open your store on Rakuten Japan and receive orders from Rakuten's users and customers. And when it comes to shipping, you have two options. You can either drop shipping directly from your overseas warehouse, or when you have better confidence in the Japanese market or your business ready, you can definitely bulk ship your inventory to Japan and fulfill locally to give it a better customer experience and shorter shipping lead time. And so cross-border e-commerce actually makes it a lot easier for overseas companies to enter the Japanese market for the entity, but also for the customer and regulation perspective as well. And technically, a lot of the sellers in certain categories, they're not subject into the local product registration law. But there are some categories that are actually subject to additional import regulations. And here are the three major ones that I have listed out, which are food, fashion, cosmetics, and health category. And so for food and usually, bottle sealed and canned processed food, they are allowed to, sell on Rakuten without additional product screening. But any meat or temperature controlled required and fresh foods or extremely short shelf life products are not allowed to sell on Rakuten. And for fashion category, we do have a 77 brand list with brands like Louis Vuitton, Fendi, and Abercrombie Fitch, and UGG. And if you are a seller that carry brands on the 77 brand list, you will be required to provide the qualified product purchase receipt, and that can be traced back to the brand owner or authorized distributor. And so this is usually a little bit challenging for a lot of fashion sellers on those, selling really popular brands. But my team does have experience helping fashion merchants to pass the product screening. And so for cosmetics and health category, which is the most popular category among the overseas sellers, and they are subject to ingredients check and description check. And so we have a prohibitive ingredients list. And so when we have cosmetics or health category merchants, and while Rakuten screening will run our own product screening, and we do require the merchants to check the prohibitive ingredients list themselves and to make sure the products they sell does not contain any ingredients that are on the list. And so merchants are responsible for the products and the ingredients they sell. They are responsible for, make sure they comply with the Japanese law. And the as copy law in Japan is actually very strict. And so we do run a product description check. And so we want to make sure that, the product description and also the verbiage on the products are, are kind of a complying with the Japanese as copy law, and which doesn't allow some verbiage like rejuvenating, anti-aging, or whitening. And basically those very specific terms that leads directly to the efficacy of the products. And so you want the product description to be as neutral as possible. Yeah, so those are the additional import regulations that merchants in those categories do need to comply to. But in general, cross-border, it's quite lenient when it comes to product regulation. And so move on to the business operation side. Yeah, as I mentioned that, entities in certain countries are allowed to onboard. And so here I'd like to share more details about what is qualified countries and what are qualified entities. So we have segmented the countries into 3 tiers. Tier 1 is US, Japan, and Korean entities. And basically, if you are a company from those 3 regions and countries, and with qualified credit risk report and operation details, you can apply directly to Rakuten. And so the chance to pass the screening, it's also a little bit higher. And so for the tier 2, which are a company from France, Germany, UK, China, Taiwan, Canada, Hong Kong, and Australia. You can also sign up with Rakuten directly if you have qualified credit risk report and and also operation details. But an office visit will be required before you submit your application. Basically, my team needs to send someone to your office in your local country and regions, and to make sure that the information you provide is true to the reality. And so once you pass the office visit, you will be treated as the same as the entity in tier 1, and so everything else is the same. But for the countries and regions that are not in tier 1, tier 2, we do have a list of countries that I can share later. And so you can choose to hire an MOR and to sign contract with Rakuten. Basically, you're not allowed to sign contract with Rakuten directly. You need to hire MOR, which is the authorized partner by Rakuten, and they will sign contract with Rakuten on your behalf directly and run your store on your behalf. Yeah, we do have some sellers that are, signing up with us through MOR because I see great potential in Japan, and but their countries are currently not qualified for direct onboarding. And so move to shop plan. And so here's the cost of selling on Rakuten. And basically for US-based companies, there are 3 major costs: registration fee, monthly fee, and also the commission. And so registration fee is a one-time cost, and it's 60,000 yen, about $450. And monthly fee is 50,000 yen, but you pay every 6 months. And so in your first year, you're looking at a fixed cost about $4,900 depends on the exchange rate. And the total commission is about 10%. On the right side, I have listed out the commission breakdown, but it's just for the US company, and for other regions, and you are subject to additional deposit. And so it will be different and based on the countries. And so it needs to be discussed in case by case. And what is included in the fee? And Rakuten is famous for our white glove merchant support service. And so basically, we have an account manager for merchants during their entire onboarding journey, from application to shop open to shop launch and operation. And so especially the e-commerce consultant, which is our highly awarded service. And after you launch your store, we will assign a bilingual e-commerce consultant to your account, either in Japan or in the US, depends on the location preference of the merchants. And they're the best resource for merchants to reach out to for best practice on Rakuten, market trends, and market insight, and also the promotion cycle on Rakuten is very different from other marketplace. And the Rakuten e-commerce consultant is the best person to reach out to for, campaign related questions and the proposals. Usually the way it works for most of the merchants is they will set up a bi-weekly or monthly meeting with our e-commerce consultant. And whenever there was a major campaign coming up, they will work with e-commerce consultant to set a sales target, and also the marketing and advertisement plan in order to reach the sales target. So yeah, other than that, of course, you will be able to access to Rakuten's backend system, merchant server, and participate in all Rakuten marketing campaigns. And move on to business operations. And yeah, I think cross-border makes it a lot easier for overseas merchants to enter Japan, but it does require overseas companies to have some sort of Japanese operation capacity in order to, provide better service to the customers and also better operate their store on Rakuten. And so how do you bring those Japanese operation capacity on board? There are three major options. Option A, hire locally. And option number B, which is the most popular option, is to work with a service partner. We do have a referral list and available. And so if you are interested, and we can definitely connect you to the, the service partner. But just a disclaimer that those partners, they are totally separate from Rakuten, so they will charge additional fees. And option number C is freelancer. It's getting popular for some companies that are have some basic Japanese operation capacity, but they also have a sufficient internal capacity to work closely with a freelancer. And so we have added the website Upwork here. Actually, if you go there, there are a lot of bilingual Amazon freelancer that are providing operation and design service for overseas sellers. Move on to logistics. And so there are three options in terms of logistics. And option number one, existing logistic companies are a good option. And so no additional setup. And so, and also most of the international shipping company, they can ship products to Japan. And so option number two is Japanese logistic companies like Yamato, Sagawa, or Nippon Express. Especially Yamato has really good global presence. They have over 26 offices and locations in the United States. And they usually, compared to option one, they offer a little bit better rates. And because they are a Japanese company, they're more localized and know about the import regulation better. They can also provide some initial shipping consultation to the merchants. And option number three, Rakuten Super Logistics, and for domestic fulfillment. And this is more suitable for more, mature merchants. And once you are ready to move inventory to Japan and, pass all the commercial import regulation and also obtain all the product registration. And I will highly recommend you to consider Rakuten Super Logistics. And because it's a Rakuten's own fulfillment service, and based on the market data, the pricing is one of the most competitive one in Japan. Yeah, so the next one is the payment and business operation. And so, well, the way the onboarding process works is once you're ready to apply, you will send us the application. And so once we receive the application, it takes about 4 to 6 weeks and for the account opening screening. And we will screen your corporate qualification, product qualification, and we also run legal review. And I would say it's a pretty intensive screening compared to other marketplaces. And so once you pass the product screening, and you will be able to access to Rakuten account, and you will also receive the first invoice. And so the first invoice will be the initial registration fee plus 6 months fixed fee. And so that's going to be 360,000 Japanese yen, approximately $3,000 and 3,310 US dollars. And so in terms of the payout and settlement cycle, well, merchants will be able to receive payout from us in twice every month, and basically every 15th and 30th. And we run consolidated, payouts, and then to blend together, with sales payout and all the charges. But the tricky part is the settlement payment cycle is different. And so you receive sales payout twice a month, but the fees are charged every 90 to 6 days. which means that basically for each month you receive sales payout from us first, and then in another 1 month or 2 months you will receive the sales commission and other charges and from Rakuten for this month. And so it's kind of a unique. Yeah, so that wraps up my conversation. Yeah, it's a great marketplace, lots of opportunity. And so, yeah, I am really looking forward to work with you to grow your presence in Japan.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Gina. And so, yeah, if there are additional questions, feel free to send them via the chat. And we do have quite a few questions already from before. So I'll go ahead and I'll kind of moderate this chat piece here real quick. But I'll start off with one of the questions that I hear a lot of the time, and it is knowing Japanese a must? I will say that it is very helpful to know Japanese. It can be a big boon to your business, but I won't go as far as to say it's required. Because as Gina was mentioning, there are these freelancers, there are these partners that you can work with that understand, the local nuances of the market and will be able to help you with that. I think another thing that's very important, and this is going to have very big implications for kind of the Japan market in general, is things like ChatGPT, if I'm being completely honest. Like, you can ask ChatGPT, hey, write me a product description for this product in Japanese, and it'll be like, sure. And you could be like, write it sarcastically, write it whatever, right? And it will translate that nuance as well into the target language. So because of that, like, I think there's no better time really to enter, the Japanese market, which has been typically a very difficult market to enter because of cultural differences, because of language barriers. So I won't say it's a must. I will say, for example, like, I speak and read, write Japanese. It's been extremely helpful. But yeah, it's not a must. Next, I'll ask you a question here, Gina. But when it comes to categories of products that are most interesting to like Japanese consumers, or what do you kind of see on Rakuten for those types of categories?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So currently with our existing sellers, there are a few categories that are doing particularly better than other categories. And those are supplements and cosmetics and fashion, electronics, and also baby and maternity are surprisingly good, and in the past few years. And but that doesn't mean that other and also outdoor and sports. Yeah, and we're still exploring new categories, but I think the categories is very important. But because Japan is such a big economy, actually, well, you will be surprised by the level of maturity of the Japanese customers. With that said, it means that Japanese consumers are basically open to all categories as long as they like your products. And so it's very important for us as a merchant development manager to run our market fit and evaluation when we come across the merchants. Some merchants that are very big in the US or EU, they may not be a good fit for the Japanese market. And we also saw some cases that the smaller merchants in overseas, in our local markets, are doing particularly well in Japan. So I do have some categories that can be generalized, and that usually we see a good pattern of success, but we don't want to simplify that question. And so we do, highly recommend every merchants, if you are interested, come to us and let us do some initial market research and some initial market fit and product fit evaluation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds good. And I remember within Shiseido as well, we saw Rakuten as a very big opportunity for like the cosmetics and kind of like health category. So yeah, that's a really good call out. And I think another thing that just from like my personal shopping habits is when I'm looking for something like specific or maybe something not as common, I usually go to Rakuten because it's so broad. Like every category, basically, you're able to find something. So I think, yeah, if you're curious, like, oh, I don't know if we'll be a good fit or not, if it's on Rakuten, like there will be a fit, I think, for you.
Yeah. a
Yeah.
really quick way for us to run, market fit research is to just to throw your brand name there and to find how many resellers are listing products. And I worked for Rakuten for a few years. I was constantly surprised by there are some brands that I had no knowledge about. They turns out to have really good presence on Rakuten already. And so I would say Japanese market was really mature buyers.
Definitely.
Yeah.
There was another question that we had in the registration that was talking about like non-internet or like non-Japanese products in Japan and kind of how it's different from the rest of Asia. And I think what you mentioned there, that covers a lot of that. But I also know like things like Korean beauty, for example, is extremely popular here in Japan. And if you think of like geopolitical things, maybe Korea and Japan don't always get along, right? But when it comes to products and things like that, people don't really tend to care that much. So I wouldn't say that like there's a strong bias against international products. I would say that oftentimes Japanese people will tend to think of Japanese domestic products as potentially having a higher standard of quality because they're familiar with it, and there's kind of a long history there. But that doesn't mean like you can't surmount that. I mean, as I experienced directly in Shiseido as a very domestic company, there were lots of international kind of sellers and products that we didn't always enjoy competing against. So
you came from Shiseido. You definitely know the beauty customers in Japan much better than me. And so in the past, I actually spoke with a lot of executives in beauty category, and they were intimidated by the Japanese market. And first, it's really big. It's the second largest beauty market in the world. But at the same time, a lot of those companies, they just feel like Japanese customers, they only buy made in Japan. But it's actually a wrong assumption because, you see the success of K-beauty. K-beauty is so successful in Rakuten. We actually had a search, I would say like search term just for K-beauty. And there are also like even under our team, cosmetics from overseas US and EU market, those brands, Western brands, they are generating really good GMS. And so Japanese beauty consumers only buy made in Japan. It's definitely a wrong assumption. Yeah.
Definitely. Another question that we had in the pre-registration, as well as I see it kind of in the chat, is around the marketing budgets. So the pre-registration, they said, average monthly spend, how much do you recommend for marketing a new company? And then in the chat, what kind of marketing budget do you recommend for like the first year of entry? And they gave an example of as like a successful US collagen powder brand in order to get into like that top 10. So how would you kind of go about that?
Yeah, and so that's a really good question. We get that a lot from merchants. And so it really depends on the brand awareness. And so usually for new brands, and our e-commerce consultant will recommend 15% in the first year. And it depends on, the sales growth, and you can adjust up or down in the following years. But 15% is kind of like the threshold we are looking at, but really depends on the brand awareness. If your brand awareness is already there, you probably don't need 15%. And also usually the multi-brand reseller or retailer, they end up, spending less than the brand owner because they're selling many different brands that already, have brand awareness on Rakuten. They can leverage on that. And so they usually have higher ROI in their advertisement spending.
Awesome. I've got another question. What turnover size does a US business need to be able to apply? And so they give an example of they're doing $1 million a year.
Yeah, and so we are $1 million, definitely a very ideal size, and we are looking at more than $500,000 US. Yeah, medium size and larger size. Yeah.
Perfect. I've got another one here. And so what are some of the setbacks to expect when trying to get into Japan? And I'll maybe take part of this and you can add anything if you'd like. But I think as you were watching this presentation, you might have thought, oh, there's all of these things we have to do. We have to, look into partners. We have to look into, remittance. We have to look into shipping, logistics, and such. And it can seem like a lot, right? But what I've found is very nice about the Japanese market is that they're very upfront. Like what you're seeing is this is honest. Like there's not going to be all of a sudden a hidden fee or like another hoop that you have to jump through at the end stage, right?
Yeah.
It's very upfront, and so they want you to know and be aware of everything that you're kind of getting into, but just so that you can succeed, so that you're not getting any curveballs. So I'd say that's not really like it seems like it's a setback, but it's really that high level, that high standard of service that we were talking about before, of just being upfront, being honest. So I would say that, like, sure, it seems like there's a high barrier, but even if you're expanding into another place, it might look like there's a lower barrier, but then when you actually start doing all these things, you're like, oh crap, I got to do that too, and oh, there's that too, right? And I think also the prize is very worth it here in Japan. As we talked about it a lot today. It's the 4th largest e-com market. Now it's trending to become the 3rd largest. Very, very big pie, so to speak. And so there's plenty of pieces of pie for, I think all of the people that are attending today. So yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, because that's something we deal with every day. Is most of the merchants, when they are interested in global expansion, they are already quite familiar with other international markets, especially China, which is filled with like a lot of very aggressive partners. And yeah, and so that's why a lot of merchants will tell us, say, hey, how come this service agency is less aggressive? Like, they're less responsive, and also they're much more conservative. And that's exactly the point that when you said, and they're very upfront, and they don't want to overpromise, but they want to make sure they deliver what they promise. And so that seems a little off-putting to some international sellers, because when they enter a new market, they want to be encouraged, right? And they want to basically the entire ecosystem to create this sort of like, confidence for them. But you will probably get less of that when you enter Japan, because like this is kind of like a Japanese culture that they don't want to overpromise, but they want to make sure they deliver, and execution is there.
Yep, definitely.
Another setback, I will say that I do want to point out the communication part. I will say the communication cost is kind of high. And so, well, even though like we don't absolutely require overseas sellers to have internal Japanese speaker, but and most of our ecosystem partner, they are bilingual. But I would say because of the culture difference and the communication, that does get a little bit more challenging to overseas sellers. And so I think overseas companies, they do need to be a little bit more patient and have a little bit more cultural awareness in order to have effective communication with the partners in Japan.
Awesome. One other question here that was from the pre-registration. They're asking, does Rakuten hold funds and freeze them if anything goes wrong with performance metrics or the account?
Oh, yeah. And so for, as I mentioned that, we do require deposit and for certain countries and regions, but for US companies, we don't require deposit. But for China and EU companies and Taiwanese companies, basically only Japanese and Korean and US companies are not required to pay deposit. And, companies from other regions are required to pay deposit. Yeah, but those are totally refundable, when you close your store and you don't have any, pending balance with Rakuten.
Yeah, awesome. Maybe we'll do one more question here before wrapping up. And so this is, what are the 3 key factors for a brand to be successful in e-commerce in Japan? Very broad. We can go many different ways for this. I guess I'll start off with this one. I would say, the first thing, and really this kind of applies anywhere in Japan, but you want to set up kind of like a very straightforward model. And so the first thing you need to do is you need to be available. And so what I mean when I'm saying available is you need to, be on the right platforms like Rakuten, and you need to be in stock. So like if you're always having logistics issues and things, then people can't continue to buy and they'll lapse, they won't become loyal, and they won't be able to buy you in the first place, right? So be available. The next thing I would say is be findable. So what I mean there is once you're in the right places, you're available, you need to do things like your SEO, you need to do, your paid media in order to get in front of the people on those platforms. Rakuten's a very big place. And so it can, if you're not approaching it as such, it can be easy to kind of maybe disappear into the background if you're, not on top of things.
Yeah.
So making sure that you're running your SEO, making sure that you're doing your paid media is the next thing. Then again, there's other people selling on Rakuten, right? There's lots of people selling on Rakuten. So you want to differentiate and become buyable. So be available, be findable, be buyable. And what I would say is the most important there is your content. So the content is, the images that you use, the copy that you use. And I would say if you can get that localized into Japanese, that will be much more beneficial than just maybe taking like an English asset. Like a lot of markets, even in APAC, they're fine with just English assets a lot of the time, but Japan especially, I think, is more language sensitive. And so, yeah, having that content and then other things like promotions can be super useful for being buyable. So as we were talking about, like with Rakuten super sales, with like getting 16 times points, like jump on that. One of the things that I saw with My Protein, here's My Protein jug, when they entered Japan, they started doing what they called payday sales. And so in Japan, on the 25th of every month is pretty much when everyone gets their monthly paycheck. It's not like biweekly or anything else. It's once a month, usually 20th or 25th, especially. And so they're like, hey, it's payday. And they'd blast out marketing messages. They would give discounts, and they grew their market share extremely fast. So like those types of things, like promotions as well. So again, like available, findable, buyable is the kind of order I would focus on.
That's a really good answer. Maybe I can just tackle it from a different angle. So I would say the first thing is market fit. And I think market fit is the most important thing for overseas companies to be successful in Rakuten. Because if there's no market fit, no matter how much hard you try, the success is will be compromised. And so this is something that, we will address in the early onboarding stage. And so we will work very closely with the merchants to run, market fit evaluation to make sure that, the market fit is there. And so merchants will have a better understanding about their presence in Japan. And the second thing is, I would say commitment, because it's so easy to enter some other marketplace. And so merchants, usually they will have the similar expectation for Rakuten. I would say, Japan is a very unique market, and Rakuten is a very Japanese marketplace. And so in order to fully, unlock your sales potential on Rakuten and also in the Japanese market, merchants do need to have more commitment into this market and understand, the culture differences and the consumer behavior and the marketing promotion cycle, as you mentioned, and also be more localized. And, we don't really require the companies to have internal speakers, but you need to come up with a solution to have a Japanese operation capacity. And so those are the three, I would say, main factors, success factors, and for overseas companies to consider when they enter the Japanese market. And market fit, commitment, and localization.
Awesome. Yeah, I totally agree. I think we're just right up to time now. I'm just going to share my screen one last time here. And so if you do have any questions on Rakuten, how to enter the market, feel free to reach out to Gina. Here's her email here. If you have any questions about Pacvue and marketing, e-commerce, acceleration in Japan and other markets, feel free to reach out to me. at this email address. And for everyone who's stuck around, here's just like a small gift kind of thing, is within the assembly family, which Pacvue is a part of, we also have Helium-10. And some of you may be aware of it, some of you may not be, but it's the kind of go-to seller optimization tool. And so we do have a free Chrome extension. If you scan this QR code or go to this link, you can get that added to your browser, and it will help you with things like keyword research and things like finding that product market fit. And while this doesn't directly factor into Rakuten currently, you can still use this to do a lot of that research and then apply those learnings to Rakuten. So feel free to download that. We'd be happy to help you there as well. But yeah, once again, thanks for joining, everyone. We really appreciate your participation, jumping on early here in Asia, maybe other times in other parts of the world. And we will be sharing this recording with you once we're finished. So thanks again. Thank you, Gina, for presenting. And have a good, have a great evening, morning, afternoon, whatever it is for you.
All right. Thank you.